Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
It's episode 297. That means that I am on pace for episode 300 to happen next Wednesday. That means that episode 300 not only will be the launch of FPP Radio version 4.0, it will also be an Ask Me Anything episode, so get your questions ready and send them my way. You can send those over to ama@fppradio.com. I've only got one question this week, and it's one of these sort of questions that, as a media producer, media reporter, journalist of sorts, I get asked, not all the time, but I get asked, a good bit, especially when there's a major news story that some people will say, it's a false flag and they're trying to hide something from us. And they being, the global elites, if you will, they are trying to hide something from us, so they put forth this sort of story. And while everybody's focused on something, they do something else. And so the question is, what are they trying to hide? Well, actually, the question that was submitted to me, while it's along that same sort of line, the question is, what important news story is passing by unnoticed right now? And my question is, unnoticed by whom? Because I cover a lot of news on my daily newscast that you're not necessarily going to get from the mainstream media. The mainstream media is not going to tell you about the Syrian peace talks that are happening. The mainstream media is not going to tell you about the war that's been raging on in Yemen for over the last year. Why will the media not talk to you about the Yemeni war? Well, that's because it's being conducted by one of the allies of the United States government, Saudi Arabia. See, it's okay when Saudi Arabia kills people and puts a blockade on a country and prevents food and aid from coming into the country. That's okay because Saudi Arabia's our friend. We can't talk bad about our friend. So the media is not covering that, but I would not say that that's going unnoticed because people are taking notice. There are wonderful people over at antiwar.com that are bringing you this news every day. There's also stories about John Kasich trying to, or rather Marco Rubio trying to get John Kasich thrown off the primary ballot in Pennsylvania. Now that Marco Rubio has dropped out of the race, will that attempt continue? I don't know, but that's a news story nonetheless that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. And why do I care that John Kasich is in a ballot access battle in Pennsylvania? Well, I find it sort of ironic in a bittersweet sort of way, because John Kasich, a couple of years ago, illegally spent $600,000 to keep the Libertarian Party gubernatorial candidate off the ballot in Ohio. So I do find it a sort of bittersweet justice, if you will, that now there's an attempt to remove John Kasich from a ballot over a ballot access sort of hurdle. Now, the way things work in Pennsylvania for ballot access challenges is if you are the person who has your petition challenged, you have to pay legal fees to defend yourself. If you win, you do not get compensated. If you lose, you have to pay the legal fees of the person that challenged you. So basically, it's a way for someone to wind up causing any candidate to spend a lot of money to basically keep their place on the ballot. So that's happening. There's also the Israeli government confiscating land in Palestine. It's being reported by antiwar.com, but it's not being reported necessarily in the mainstream media. So would that be considered something that's going unnoticed? Or is the question here, what is something that absolutely no news agency anywhere is talking about? And if that's the question, then I have no way of answering, because I have no way of knowing what sort of things you would consider to be important news stories that absolutely zero media outlets are covering. Now, if you only go by the top headline on Google News, then yes, you're going to miss a lot of news. That's why you need to find sources, and I'm not just going to say, alternative media sources, but you need to look even on UPI and Reuters and the Associated Press. Look on page 2, page 3, page 4 of their headlines for the day, because they cover a lot of stuff. Now, some of the stuff that winds up getting covered is absolutely ridiculous and ludicrous and makes absolutely no sense. There was a headline yesterday from WMUR, which is basically the television news station in New Hampshire. And the headline was something about suspicious men challenge teens to a rap battle. And I was like, all right, why are they saying, you should be on the lookout for this? And so I read the article, and basically it was a couple of guys that rolled up in an SUV, saw some teenagers, and said, hey, you want to have a battle rap and spit some bars? And the kids said no. And so the guys in the SUV drove away. And then the kids called the cops because that's suspicious activity, apparently. No, that's not suspicious activity. That's just some guys, I think they said, early 20s to early 30s. So basically, like somebody in college, possibly just out of college. It's like, hey, I want to have some fun and challenge some teenager to a rap battle. Oh, you don't want to battle rap? Okay, have a nice day. And then they drove off. Like that's not newsworthy, but nonetheless, it made the news. So again, I don't really completely understand the question, and I think it's an absolutely ludicrous question to begin with, because again, I get asked this in various forms, not through like the Ask Me Anything sort of thing, but on Free Talk Live and various other ways. I'll get asked, what sort of stuff is the globalists trying to hide by throwing this false flag, and the media is just paying attention to that? And my question is, if that's the only thing that you're paying attention to, and you're not digging into like page 2, 3, 4, 5 of the search results online, then don't blame the globalist because you didn't read the news. If all you're doing is paying attention to the top headline and not looking any further, that's on you. To where you don't know what's going on, because the media is reporting on stuff, but if you don't read it, then it's on you. It's not on the media for not spoon feeding you the information. And then secondarily, this brings me to another complaint that I have, where basically people will complain about the media either just, oh, you're throwing this in our face because all you do is talk about this nonstop. But yet, if it's only mentioned in passing, then the opposite is true, to where they say, they're not talking about this at all, or they're not talking about this enough. Well, exactly how many times do I need to mention a certain thing for it to be more than not talking about it enough, but not quite I'm throwing it in your face? Because I really would love an answer to that question, but nobody can answer it because people just want to complain.
Bitcoin Not Bombs is a launching pad for nonprofits and social entrepreneurs into the financial freedom of the Bitcoin economy. Bitcoin Not Bombs offers premium publicity campaigns designed to facilitate an organization's adoption of Bitcoin as a payment system. Bitcoin Not Bombs is fully committed to being the hub of the nonprofit sector of the Bitcoin economy, maximizing the potential cross-promotion of all our clients and commercial partners. To learn more, visit bitcoinnotbombs.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, Spendabit, and Amazon at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com. The Doublespeak Dictionary by Leslie Starr O'Hara satirizes the marked difference between the ideal of we the people and the reality of we the elite, while offering an insightful glimpse into the clockworks of the totalitarian mind. Ever irreverent but never irrelevant, the Doublespeak Dictionary serves as a subversive and humorous but timely reminder that the emperor has no clothes. The Doublespeak Dictionary is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
So there were primary elections yesterday, and there were actually two in which people were able to vote for libertarians. And when I say people were able to vote for libertarians, I don't mean like, well, there was somebody on the Republican primary ballot that's kind of a libertarian on one or two issues. No. I mean, there were actually Libertarian Party primary ballots in two states yesterday, those states being North Carolina and Missouri. I was on the ballot in North Carolina because it's incredibly easy to get on the ballot in North Carolina on the primary, where North Carolina allows the political party leaders, the chairs of the political parties, to submit the list of candidates to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State puts those candidates on the ballot, no questions asked, other than they contacted me to make sure that the form of my name was correct. And I said, I use my middle initial, and so they said, okay, and they put me on the ballot as Darryl W. Perry. Now, in Missouri, things are not so easy. There are two ways to get on the ballot in Missouri. You can either write them a check for $1,000, or you can collect 5,000 signatures on petitions. One of those is incredibly time-consuming and costly. The other is just somewhat costly. So what I tried to do in Missouri, because I heard that this worked for somebody back in 2012, was filed the indigent paperwork and simply said, I wish to be on the ballot. And they responded, you need to send us either $1,000 or 5,000 petitions. And I did not respond, and I was not on the ballot. So there were 5 candidates on the ballot in Missouri, meaning that 5 people wasted $1,000. Those 5 candidates were Austin Peterson, Steve Kerbell, Rhett Smith, Cecil Ince, and Mark Allen Feldman. Uncommitted was also on the ballot in Missouri. Basically, uncommitted is a way of casting a vote for none of the above. And uncommitted wound up winning the Libertarian Party primary with 40.442% of the vote. Austin Peterson, who is from Missouri and from what I've heard was expecting to wind up winning. He was expecting to win the primary there in Missouri. He wound up with 29.365% of the vote, which was the most of any of the 5 human candidates. Cecil Ince, who is also from Missouri, wound up with 4.6% of the vote in Missouri. In North Carolina, again, there were 11 candidates on the ballot, plus no preference, which is the North Carolina way of saying none of these candidates or uncommitted. And also it should be noted that uncommitted was on the ballot for the Republican, Democrat, and Constitution Party primary ballots as well. Uncommitted actually being the only candidate on the Constitution Party primary, getting all 682 votes. In North Carolina, no preference was also on the Democrat and Republican ballot. No preference wound up in third place in the Democratic primary with 3.29% behind Hillary and Bernie Sanders, just above Martin O'Malley, who has dropped out of the race, and Rocky De La Fuente, who is still in the race. But you would not know that if you listened only to the mainstream media, because they're not covering him. On the Republican side, Donald Trump wound up winning in North Carolina. No preference finished 6th behind the 5 candidates that yesterday, or 4 of the candidates yesterday that were still running, plus Ben Carson. Marco Rubio has since dropped out. In the Libertarian race, Gary Johnson wound up winning with just under 42% of the vote. No preference, i.e. none of the above, came in second, about 350 votes behind at 35.5%. A gentleman by the name of John David Hell, who has dropped out of the race, but he did so after being placed on the primary ballot. He wound up finishing third with 5.68% of the vote, and it should be noted he was also the top of the ballot. And I mention that only because there have been studies that show that whoever is placed at the top of the ballot will get a larger than normal share of the vote, all things being equal. And they know this because, again, there have been studies that do all sorts of weird things to where they'll give people several different ballots and they'll arrange the candidates in such a way as to where they factor in margin of error and, you know, ballot placement and whatnot. And it is, you know, somehow able to be determined that top of the ballot line winds up giving you an extra couple percentage votes. Joy Waymeyer, who was the only female in the race for the Libertarians, came in fourth with 4.63%, followed by Austin Peterson and yours truly with 3.2 and 2.04% respectively. And the person that finished just behind me, Steve Kerbel, announced today that he was dropping out of the race and endorsing Gary Johnson. And I have to say that that's a little disappointing that Steve would, one, drop out, and two, that he would wind up endorsing Gary. And the reason that I say it's a little disappointing is because Steve was seen as radical friendly, meaning that he himself is not necessarily one to call himself a radical libertarian, but he's definitely friendly towards the radicals. And, well, Gary, not so much. So it's a little disappointing that Steve would wind up endorsing Gary. But nonetheless, I am pleasantly surprised with some of my results in North Carolina. Obviously, I would have preferred to finish above sixth, but it was a solid sixth place finish, and I did post a status on my Facebook page, the fan page for Darryl W. Perry, and I will read that to you. It says, I'd like to thank everyone who voted in the non-binding presidential preference primary in North Carolina. While I would have liked to have gotten more votes, a solid sixth-place finish out of the 12 ballot options is just more motivation to continue the race for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Between now and the LP nominating convention over Memorial Day weekend, I will be attending state LP conventions and participating in debates, forums, and straw polls, and with your help can continue promoting the ideas of liberty as boldly and as often as possible, and to give as many people as possible the chance to vote for an actual libertarian in November 2016. In peace, freedom, love, and liberty, Darryl W. Perry. P.S. My strongest showings were in Perkins, Ashe, Clay, Edgecombe, Mitchell, and Montgomery counties, where I finished either first or second. Perkins, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So anyone down in down in North Carolina, hopefully you will wind up telling me if I am pronouncing that correctly. I was tied for first. Additionally, I placed third in Cherokee, Columbus, Davie, Haywood, Lenoir, Onslow, Rutherford, Stanley, and Wilson counties. Highest vote totals were in Mecklenburg and Wake counties, where I finished 5th and 7th, respectively. Stay tuned. There's more.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
FiendPhone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of FiendPhone right now at fiendphone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve FiendPhone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to fiendphone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's fiendphone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, Echo, November, phone.com.
FiendPhone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
So before I jump into some news here in this final segment of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, I want to make sure that I tell you about the fine, wonderful people at Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For nearly 40 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They also take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760 or online at rrbi.co. That's 800-874-9760 or online at rrbi.co. Now, I've got a story here from the intellectualist.co where they're reporting on a Gallup poll. And Gallup, which is a large polling company, asked questions about who do you believe is the biggest threat to global peace. And while the intellectualist does not link to the actual survey, what they do show is a map. And it's a map of the world. And they have overlaid over a lot of the countries flags. And the flags represent the answer given by people within that country. And what you see is a lot of American flags all over the world, specifically in Russia, China, Afghanistan, or I believe that's Afghanistan. That might be Pakistan. There's also in several parts across Europe, Africa, most of South America, Mexico. It's all the U.S. flag. Now, what you see outside of there is the Pakistani flag in India, and I believe that's Afghanistan. So the American flag is in Pakistan. The Pakistani flag is in India and Afghanistan, meaning that people in India and Afghanistan believe that the Pakistanis are the biggest threat to global peace. The flag that overlays the United States and Canada is the Iranian flag. The flag that overlays Iraq is the Israeli flag. That is also represented in, I believe that is Morocco and something to the east of Libya, or rather to the west of Libya, east of, I believe that's Algeria. And, yeah, it's really interesting looking at this, and I wish that the story here actually linked over to the results, because I would love to delve into that. Noticing a couple other flags in places. The North Korean flag is represented in South Korea, meaning that the South Koreans view the North Koreans as the biggest threat to global peace. And I can't tell exactly, but I believe that's the Chinese flag that's overlaid over Japan and a couple of countries in Southeast Asia. But just, again, looking at this map and seeing the American flag all over the globe as representative of the people that, the majority of people or the plurality of people in those countries view the United States as the largest threat to global peace. And I think that things will wind up being even worse on the global scale if we wind up in about 10 months with President Donald Trump. But, however, there's a story from Reason.com that says that Donald Trump supporters are actually less authoritarian than supporters of Ted Cruz. Again, this comes from Reason.com, and they say, the score about Donald Trump, right? He is playing directly to authoritarian indications or inclinations, according to PhD student Matthew McWilliams in Politico, who cites the way Trump voters rally around, among other things, proposals to ban Muslims and deport undocumented immigrants. McWilliams writes, "Authoritarians obey." He sampled 1,800 voters back in December. They rally to and follow strong leaders, and they respond aggressively to outsiders, especially when they feel threatened. Not so fast, say political scientists Wendy Ron and Eric Oliver, who did their own survey and argue that Trump's followers aren't particularly authoritarian, but populist in inclination. In the Washington Post, they write, "Authoritarianism, as understood by political psychologists, refers to a set of personality traits that seek order, clarity, and stability. Authoritarians have little tolerance for deviance. They're highly obedient to strong leaders. They scapegoat outsiders and demand conformity to traditional norms. Populism, on the other hand, is a type of political rhetoric that casts a virtuous people against nefarious elites and strident outsiders. Scholars measure populism in a variety of ways, but we focus on three central elements: belief that a few elites have absconded with the rightful sovereignty of the people, deep mistrust of any group that claims expertise, and strong nationalist identity." Ron and Oliver conclude that Trump voters are less authoritarian than Ted Cruz followers and about as authoritarian as those of Marco Rubio. Note, the standard way of testing for authoritarianism is to ask about child rearing. And this is something that it's not been covered on this show, but it has been covered in depth on several episodes of Free Talk Live. And I wish I had those questions in front of me, because they're very interesting questions. And you can really tell a lot about somebody by the way they answer these questions about child rearing. One of the questions is, would you rather your child be independent or, I forget the exact wording, but the questions, they were very leading. Or not leading, but they represented polar opposites to where, again, you could tell if someone was someone that really wanted the best for their child. They wanted their child to grow up to be what I would consider to be a functional human being that is capable of making their own decisions, or if they want their child to grow up to be someone that will only ever do what they're told and not really ask questions. And again, you can really tell if somebody's an authoritarian based on the way they raise their child. The article here from Reason continues. It says, an interesting, to me anyway, are the other dimensions Ron and Oliver scope out. Bernie Sanders voters who are highly anti-elitist but relatively trusting of experts, while Hillary voters and Ted Cruz voters share the same relatively tepid embrace of American identity as a big deal. There's more. It'll be in the show notes. Don't forget, every Wednesday I answer those questions, AMA at FPPradio.com.